I should say they're the two editors of this book. And this book, I think people should definitely go out and check it out. It's Radical Humility. And with Radical Humility, there's essays in there on all sorts of topics. And we look at what's going on in the past, couple of years, especially, but even before that, we've lost a lot of bit of our kindness, our humility in general. So I'm grateful to have on Rebekah Modrak and Jamie Vander Broek. And I apologize, I probably botched those names again. And we've talked before we got on and tried to explain the names. And I apologize if I botched it again. But Rebekah and Jamie, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, right. Thanks for having us.
All right, great. Thanks so much, guys. So let's kick this around. So first of all, there was a lot of people that got involved in this book with the essays. How did you get all the authors together to formulate this idea of humility for this book?
So I was, I called up Jamie and a few other people, Sarah Buss, who's a professor of philosophy at the University of Michigan, Aaron Huvia, who's a professor of marketing. And I said, are you interested in humility? What do you think about humility? And they were all interested for different reasons, which Jamie could describe why she was interested. Aaron studies pride, like why do people feel pride in owning certain things? And pride is often sort of the opposite, can be the opposite of humility. And Sarah Buss was interested from a philosophical perspective, and I think also like politically for a lot of reasons, things that were happening politically. This was maybe like 2016. So the four of us got together and we got a big grant from the university, and the grant gave us permission to bring together 20 people from around the country who were interested in humility, to hear what they had to say on the subject. And that's how this whole thing started.
Oh, Jamie, did you want to discuss anything too?
Sure, I think that's a really good summary of how things got started. It really was kind of like a single person and then a small group and then a group of people who met together in person to talk about ideas. So this is my first time contributing to an edited volume like this, but it feels to me like maybe like a different way that the book kind of came to being than is typical. Like it really originated from people talking to each other and learning from each other in like a really open and honest way.
So you guys discussed about this. There's all different topics as far as essays in this book. When talking with the writers of these essays, how did they kind of figure out what topic to go with what? We talked about this, people talking about politics, about all these other issues. So how did they get to those topics?
Well, for some of them, it was really very natural for them because some of them are academics and they already talked about, like Aaron, he writes about pride. So it was not really surprising for him to be asked to think about sort of the opposite of pride, maybe. And then that's true for others. They already write about areas of philosophy or psychology that are directly related. But for other people, we had to almost convince them that they had something to say about the topic. I can think of like Rick Boothman, who is I think he's retired now, but he had been kind of like the chief lawyer for the medical system at our university. And he had been responsible for a really big shift in the way that they treat things that go wrong at the hospital. But, for him to be suddenly asked to speak about the topic of humility was surprising. And we had to kind of work with him to help him see how he could contribute to the project, what he had to say, what we were interested in. And that was true for some of the other participants as well.
So and the funny thing there is that like his essay turned out to be one of my favorite in the whole book. Some of the people who, would not have identified themselves as knowing something about humility, but it's a really beautiful essay about why deny and defend is a really problematic policy for a hospital to affect in terms of healthcare. That when things go wrong, as Jamie was saying, and there are there are mistakes made in caring for somebody, why an approach that enables humility is really necessary both for patients and for doctors.
So when we look at the title, where did it come about? I mean, obviously, for the people that are listening, we all know and have heard of humility in general, but what made you want to set on that title of radical humility? It seems like it's like out of the box, radical, like.
We had a lot of titles throughout the process. So the conference that we had, this like small group of people who came together, was called Humility in an Age of Jamie, what? Of Self-Promotion. And we were really like thinking about, in some ways, the things that we were responding to or that we were trying to kind of like correct in the world at that time in the title. And then over time, we didn't really want to reference those because, one, there's so many of them. So if you only point to self-promotion, you're missing out on some of the other sort of like problems. But I think that listening to people, over the last 3 years, and in watching what was happening nationally in politics, but in a lot of other areas as well, it started to seem like these really simple acts of, for example, like apologizing or admitting you did something wrong or admitting you didn't know something, were really radical acts in an era like that, was increasingly seeing people who admit failure as like losers rather than people who are actually like quite strong to make those admissions.
Did you want to say anything, Jamie?
No, I mean, I think that's exactly it.
Mm-hmm.
I think you see a lot of calls for leaders to apologize now. And I think the reason for that is because there's a dearth of it right now. It's not common to see people in power admit that they've done something wrong or that they have a weakness. That's what makes the concepts in the book radical.
All right. Now, I agree. And it's really scary right now. Now, we do look, and then I do want to dive more into the book in general, but we do look at what's going on throughout the coronavirus. Obviously, we've had the presidential election this year, too, specifically with the book coming out this year. I know that you guys have been doing research with all the other people that have written essays in the book since 2016. So I guess we could go back to 2016 because the election did start then with primaries and obviously the general in 2016 till now. So throughout that time, we've seen all kinds of craziness, leading up to 2020 with the election, with the coronavirus, which has really taken over our country and our world in general. What would you say to people that, because we've heard about lockdowns, we've heard about stop the steal, we've saw the insurrection on the Capitol in Washington, D.C. So with all these things happen, how would you try to talk to somebody that is afraid of what you said, Rebekah? They're afraid to take responsibility for their actions. A lot of people don't want to do that anymore. They feel like that's not a man of them, not a woman of them to do that. It's their way or the highway. What would you guys say to these people that act like that now and to try to kind of, bring them back to humility in general?
Well, one thing I think we've learned from the book is that one of the researchers in the book talks a lot about when people actually feel safe to have conversations about things that they're uncertain about, or when they feel safe to admit they're wrong or display weakness. And that they don't often want to do that when they feel like they're being yelled at by someone, or when they're in a very intense situation where it's being made very clear that they're on opposite sides from someone else. So I think that, one of the lessons of the book is that, sure, like we all have our opinions, we all have our positions, and there's a lot of strength in that. And I think we see, there's positive things in standing up for what you believe in, and I think that can be a good thing. But that if you're trying to change someone's mind or change the way things are going, to simply just keep yelling about your own side is not the most successful strategy. So I think that's an important point that the book makes that can kind of apply to contemporary society.
Yeah, there's a beautiful essay in the book by Valerie Tiberius and Melissa Koenig, about how to be a better friend. And one of the things that they point out is, if you're in a situation where you really want to kind of jump in and tell somebody that what they're doing is a problem, they say like to pause and to always ask a question first. Like, so before you make any kind of statement or judgment about their action, to ask a question, because it puts the other person in the position of being able to provide information, and it puts you in the position of receiving information rather than just making a judgment. And I think that's been really helpful for me, having a sense of that. But I also think that some of these things, they're hard to solve once people are adults. A lot of the advice in the book and the things that I've learned are really about like, how do you build a culture where people value humility and have and understand acknowledging the limits of their own knowledge in a kind of natural way. And to do that, I think it begins at the beginning when people are children.
I think you really see it play out in the coronavirus pandemic too. Like over the year, we've seen a lot of people shaming other people because they feel like they're not following protocols. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, all of us are kind of making this up on our own, interpreting lots of different guidelines and then deciding how we're going to behave. And then we sort of each have a sense of what's right and what's wrong that might not be a very shared understanding. So I think that Valerie and Melissa's essay in particular is very useful in this case, and that I feel like I know what's right for me and my family, but other people are making decisions that they've calculated too. And it can feel easy to start with just lashing out or shaming someone for the decisions or the actions that they're taking. But I think it is important to think about, where is that person coming from? How did they come to make that decision? And is shaming them really going to have the effect that I would like in terms of, changing the direction that we're going as a culture, kind of getting through this together?
When do you personally believe that the country started to lose its way?
Wow, that's such a huge question. I feel like I should be a historian in order to answer that.
Fair.
No, it's a great question. When we started to lose our way, I mean, I guess from the beginning, right? Like the country was founded on land that wasn't ours, and on slavery and labor, that forced labor. So I think from the beginning, and I think we've never really dealt with those issues through like reparations or through acknowledging, even like deeply acknowledging them, maybe the way that we started to do a little bit more this past summer. But yeah, I think I'd say from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think that if you think about it that way, then it really ties into some of the ideas in the book that, acknowledging when we feel like we have done something wrong, or that something was a mistake, or that we wish we had something was different, can be like a really powerful place to begin again, even if it's really hard. And I think what can be hard about it is that it sort of feels like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, maybe, that that's not to say that there aren't really wonderful things about this country or about the path that we've been on, in some ways, and that some people don't find, that some people don't, that are, I guess it's difficult to articulate, but, I think that we've lost our way, but I think we shouldn't disregard where we've been. I think disregarding where we've been is part of the problem. And so we can kind of take the positive things about the past. We can keep those as we try to fix the things that have been mistakes, and be really honest and open about those.
Yeah, I think, there was just a great speaker here at U of M, Dr. Gloria House, for Martin Luther King Day seminar, and she was saying, there's two halves of the sort of equation. The first half is to acknowledge problems and systematic problems, and then the second half is where do we go from here, and what do we do? Because fighting back and resisting things that are problematic is only one half of the equation, and in many ways that's why we wrote this book. I felt like the things that I was witnessing, both nationally, but also, within my small world, within the university, you know, I can resist those and I can protest them and I can say they're a problem, but I also want to replace those with something else. I want to build a different kind of world. And so this project really came about from that effort in order to do that. And so, for example, like I think, and that's what I was looking for, like when all of these people came to campus and spoke, and when we worked with them on these essays, I just wanted to know, like, what did you do in your life, like in your personal relationships, in your like in your work relationships, like what were the things that you did, tangible things that made some kind of difference. And there's this one great story by Kevin Hamilton, who's a dean at a school of art at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And Kevin, when he became the dean, he decided that instead of using the metaphor for like the mighty oak as like what a leader should be, he wanted a different metaphor. And like the way he thinks about being a leader is with hummus, which I always feel like I'm saying wrong. It's not the pita, it's not the chickpea dip, it's the it's like hummus, maybe it's humus, H-U-M-U-S. And that's the like decomposed matter that exists under the earth. So like one layer down under the dead leaves that you see is this this matter that microbacteria are feasting on. And there's a kind of like architectural system of decayed matter that makes it possible for new growth. And so he's been approaching his position as the dean in terms of not do I like sort of treat myself as the most important person, and sometimes I give room for other people to speak, but how do I sort of let people kind of eat away at my position? Like, how does my position become a kind of body of matter for people to give new life to their thinking? So how does my voice become less important than their voices? How do I let them set the agenda at meetings? How do I let even my inflated salary get used for their purposes? You know, how can I understand my position in that way? And some of these examples are what helps me to understand like how we go forward from here.
Well, I think it's interesting, you know, Rebekah's example. I was just in a conversation with other people who teach classes at the university, and we were kind of thinking about how to change the way that we do that. And I think it's really hard for people to do what Kevin did in his position, because we are just raised to think that once you achieve power, you like work to preserve your power or use your power for good. But like the power being the most important and a valued thing is really ingrained in us. So these teachers were like, well, if I'm not the authority figure in the classroom, what does my job even mean? Like, how do I be a teacher if I'm going to try to seed being the center of the classroom? And so I think that like one of the things that we can do is to, instead of just focusing on what you're not going to do anymore or what you're giving up, you are already doing all these other things as a person, and in their case as teachers, that are positive things that you get to keep. And you just like are sort of switching what you value and switching what you're working on and switching what you're focusing on. It's like not so much that you have to like just start over again, or like that what you did before was like completely wrong. It's just to focus on different things. So I think that, you know, a lot of like what these writers are talking about is like not paying attention to like what's been right in front of our faces for so long, and instead all this other stuff that's just been there.
All right, so we will end there. I appreciate the time again for people that just tuned in. And we hope you just didn't tune in. But anyway, the book is Radical Humility, and it's quite a few essays. Definitely check it out. Can you tell people where they can find the book?
It's published by Belt Publishing. And so you can find it on Belt Publishing's website or Amazon or your local bookstore.
All right, guys. Hey, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay, great.
All right, great, guys. Thanks so much. Have a great day, okay?